Welcome to the S.O.A.P video series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We're working our way through the exciting book of Leviticus. It is actually
this week.
So we're in chapters 9 through 12.
Yeah, but we're already in chapter 9. I mean, this has gone fairly quickly.
Yeah, in fact, there's only 27 chapters, so we're pushing the halfway point.
Yeah.
You know, we're about a third to halfway through here now.
Well, this and Leviticus is commonly called the book of the law, right?
Yeah.
The law book. We haven't seen many laws yet.
Interestingly, yeah, it's actually, for if you've been paying attention, if you've been following along, you might be surprised at what's in the first, say, third of the book of Leviticus.
Yeah, it's really setting up. And we will get to the law. Don't worry about that part. But really, at first, it was like, okay, when you break the law, here's how you atone for it.
Yeah.
And then so we went through all those, and there was peace and wave, and all these different kind
offerings,
of offerings. And then last week, it got covered from the priest's point of view.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was very similar, but again, it was from their side and what they need to do versus our side or
the congregation, right?
The congregation
people,
side.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, so last week, they even got through to the altar, right? I mean, before we start anything, the altar has to be pure, right? So what do we have to do, and what are the 100 steps that need to happen, and how much oil, who gets the oil, when do they get oiled, all that kind of stuff.
Which I mean, even today, as they are looking forward to building a new temple and getting a new altar started,
that's
is
exactly what they have to go through. Yeah. And you brought up a really good point last week. Remember it? But the idea was, it also seemed like they were kind of going through a practice.
Yeah.
Right? This is new to them.
Yeah.
And certainly, from our standpoint, the priests, they did this forever. But this is the first time they did it.
Yeah.
Right? So they got to work out the kinks.
In
the system. Yeah. So this week, I love I think it gets much clearer, the logical order of the book.
Yeah.
And what's going on. So we started with, God explaining the sin offerings and what was going to go on. And then we see the priests getting physically clean. I mean, and now we see them getting spiritually clean.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a cool thing there.
Yeah.
And we go through chapter 9. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 or 7 offerings that happen. And these are the same offerings that we saw before, but they're on behalf of the priests this time. And
if you look at the headings, of course, the headings aren't inspired, in your Bible, except in the Psalms. The Psalms are actually in there, but the rest of them are just.
That's a good except. You usually don't say the except part.
So we've got the inauguration of tabernacle worship, then the sin offering for the priests, and then the burnt offering for the priests, and then the offerings for the peoples.
Yeah.
And
but notice how the priests got first, right?
Yeah.
And even before the priests, the altars was consecrated. And
like you said, it makes very logical
order.
sense in order to get this system started.
Yeah. And at the end of chapter 9, something really cool happens, right? The glory of God appears to the people.
Yep.
And imagine being part of this crowd, and the glory of God appears, and fire shoots out.
Yeah.
And the fire goes to the altar, and God's part he accepts.
Yeah.
Right, the burnt offering, the fatty parts. I'm sure the lobe on the kidney that they always say.
And let's not forget, historically, the setting here is they're at Mount Sinai. Okay, so Moses has already gone up to the mountain. There's been the thunder and the lightning and the smoke and all this stuff.
Right.
Moses has come down, and the people are like, "You go up and talk to him because it's better for you to go there, right?" But now he comes down here.
Right.
Everything is set, and the goal has always been, from Genesis through Revelation, the goal has always been God with His people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's been the separation. There's been a separation since Genesis 3. Right. He's coming down in his presence with the people.
Right. So, of course, what do the people do? They shout and fall down to the ground, which I'd be well on their side. I get it.
Appropriate response, yep.
Yeah. So then in chapter 10, we find that Aaron has, or 2 of Aaron's sons, go off on their own special mission. They take a fire pan, they put some fire in it. It's all very specific. They put in some incense, and they presented, and the Bible calls it strange fire to the Lord.
Had not commanded them to do.
Yeah.
Now, we're not told exactly what happened. We don't know exactly what they did. Okay,
wrong.
There's some wrong. Yeah. There's some guesses.
Yep. Well, first we got to say what happened.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them.
Yeah, not just
And
the altar, but just
got
right?
them and consumed them. I would think they wouldn't be there anymore, but they were still there because later we find that their bodies are carried out.
And what's interesting is I was reading this again. I don't think I've noticed it before, so it could just be how I read it. It says that in verse 5, so they came near, these are the people coming near the dead bodies now, and carried them away in their tunics to a place outside the camp, just as Moses had spoken.
Right. So their tunics didn't get burned up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering. So it's not like God, just burnt the whole thing, and there's this smoldering skeleton there.
Right.
Like something happened to the men themselves.
Yeah. So the big question is why, right? So did they sin? And that's part of where you're going, right?
Yeah, obviously they did something that God had not commanded them to do. Some people jump down to verse 8. The Lord spoke, and 9, the Lord spoke to Aaron, do not drink wine or strong drink, you and your sons with you, when you enter the meeting tent, so that you do not die. Hey,
yeah.
maybe they were.
So maybe they were drinking
Maybe
or
they
drunk.
were drinking or drunk, right?
Yep.
Another one, and this puts us into next week or 2 weeks, I think, reading, is in chapter 16. Chapter 16 begins with the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of Aaron's 2 sons when they approached the presence of the Lord and died. And the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron your brother that he must not enter at any time into the holy place inside the special curtain in front of the atonement lid that is on the ark so that he may not die. And then we get into the Day of Atonement and the Holy of Holies, the most holy place. So some people think that they thought, well, we're just going to go ahead and go straight all the way in past the thing directly to the Ark of the Covenant, because it says that they were also carrying incense. And the table of incense or the altar of incense is right outside there. So it could be that they overstepped their bounds, and God is at this point setting up these boundaries. He's like, you don't belong back here.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of speculations. We don't know exactly, but...
Well, here's the really funny part. So, or at least to me, we see later in chapter 10 that Aaron, as a priest, is supposed to eat his share of the food.
Right.
And this is the food that we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
God came in, took his share.
Yep.
The priest has their share. He's supposed to eat it at an appointed time, and he didn't.
Yeah.
And, I mean, he just lost 2 sons.
Yep.
There's a lot going on there.
Moses got mad.
Moses definitely got mad at him, and the easy justification is I lost 2 sons today.
Yeah.
But he says, what did he say?
Yeah, end of chapter 10, we're looking at...
Would God want me to eat it when I'm mourning? Which I thought was an awesome answer, and it seems that he was thinking different than God's plan. But maybe his heart was also in the right place. But here's where I was going with it is the sons tried to do something and it didn't work. So obviously we need to follow God's rule every time.
Yeah.
Aaron didn't.
Yeah.
So what's different?
Yeah.
Right? And to me it's got to be a heart thing. But
yeah. The thing that it shows me is it reminds us, and this is something we don't think about the priests very often, okay? The priests were not just there to kill animals. Okay, that's how we usually think about them.
Yep.
The priest's job, if we take a step back and we say, what's the role of this entire thing? The priest's job, they were the judiciary.
So they decided what was sin?
Not necessarily decided, but they interpreted God's law for the people. Right. So just like every other law of every other nation, it's not going to cover every situation and scenario.
You want to do a lot, right? You want to go down and check.
So the priest's job, the job of the priests, and this is why they had Levites living in the tribal lands.
Right.
Okay? Because you have a question about the law. Where do you go? Okay, we're not using the term judges at this point. You know that there is a judge's time, but that's sort of how they were functioning. You go to the Levite, or if you were nearby, you go to the priest in Jerusalem or wherever the capital was going to be. Right. We have this question about the law.
Right.
So what Aaron is doing here,
and that would also be the experts in the law, right, that are referred to a lot in the New Testament.
Later on, the priests and the experts in the law. There was a completely different group that broke off from that and became the lawyers, the lawyers, right? Mm-hmm. But Aaron knows God's law, and he says, in this situation, I think this is the right application of the law.
Yeah.
Moses is still going, he's still trying to lay things out because they just got killed. You know, there's all sorts of stuff. He's like, oh, you know, freaking out. And Aaron's like, okay, but my job is to interpret the law based on the situation in front of me.
Yeah.
This is what I did. And apparently God was happy with that.
Yeah.
So I love seeing him already stepping into that role as basically the high priest, the chief justice of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Well, and it's interesting when his sons were killed, he stayed silent.
Yeah.
Too. We
Well,
kind of glossed over that part.
Sort of. See, I think, let's see here. Verse 3, that right after God killed them, Moses then said to Aaron, this is what the Lord says. And Aaron kept silent. So I'm like, you know he wanted to say something. What in the world is going on? You know he wanted to say
so
something.
you see Moses trying to protect him?
Well, yeah, trying to protect him from going off,
Yeah,
but also saying, listen, before you spout off, this is God's. It's not even Moses jumping in; it's God jumping in, saying, before you say anything, let me speak. And then Aaron's like, okay, I'll just sit here.
Okay, so then we get into chapter 11, and at this point, everybody's sins are forgiven, right? I mean, kind of everybody's on a clean plate, and now God tells the Israelites what they can eat.
This is one of the most famous chapters.
Yeah.
And most people aren't going to be able to say like, oh yeah, Leviticus 11. But this is like, if anybody thinks of Leviticus, this is where their brain goes first, right? Yeah. The food laws, the dietary restrictions.
Yeah. So I think it makes sense, okay, when we start with Genesis, right? God creates everything. It seemed people were vegetarians at that time.
Yeah.
Right? And then it changes at the flood.
Right.
So after the flood, God tells Noah, it's all yours.
Yeah, just like I gave you every green plant, this is Genesis chapter 9, just like I gave you every green plant, now I've given you everything, animals, creeping things, whatever, to eat. Right? Right. Everything's fair game.
Right. Now in Leviticus 11, we get what we would say kosher.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. You can eat some animals, but I'm going to tell you which ones and how you can distinguish.
And very clear. I mean, there's no
wiggle room in there.
Yeah, right? There's really not any, and no questions either.
Yeah. And then in the church age, Peter, right, a bunch of animals on a
sheet or a blanket, tarp.
A sheet comes down, take, eat, or kill, eat.
Yeah.
Meaning
it's unclean.
That's all.
It's like whatever I've called clean is not unclean. Just a quick reminder, though, it's not just that starting here you can only eat kosher. It's Israel. This did not apply outside of the land of Israel. It did not apply to the Gentile nations. This is for the nation of Israel, which is why it was such a big deal for Peter in Acts 10, because he was still living under this law. He didn't know that these things were changing or had changed. Right. And God's like, I know you don't know that yet, but I need to get this across to you, that this is no longer the law of.
Okay, so what can they eat now? Right.
Yeah.
First one was land animals. Yeah. So it goes through by groups, right?
Yeah.
And so it is animals with a divided hoof and animals that chew their cud. So they have to do both.
Yeah.
Right.
So camel chews the cud, doesn't have a divided hoof. You can get milk from it. You water, but you can't eat it. People love to eat rabbit. Maybe you eat rabbit. Sorry, chews the cud, not a divided hoof.
Yep.
Pork, of course, is the big one that most people think of. It's got the divided hoof. No, it doesn't chew the cud. That type of thing. Real clear. Real clear what animals.
And it goes through some. And it goes through some animals and gives us examples. Yep. And then it goes to water creatures and basically has to have fins and scales, and again has to have both of those.
Right. But in the church age and as Gentiles, if you want bacon wrapped lobster tail, have at it. It's all yours, because both bacon and lobster were unclean in this system. Right? Yep. Can't have lobster because it's not fins and scales.
Yep, exactly. Birds, I'll go backwards with it. Any kind of bird except for specific kinds of vultures, crows.
Mostly birds of prey.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And you can see, if
and bats,
the carrion,
which aren't birds,
and bats, but they're flying creatures. Yeah, but again, you got today we're like, okay, carrion birds. They're eating dead animals.
Exactly.
You don't
they're
want to
sticking
eat
their head
that
in
stuff,
there.
right?
Yep.
Bats, people get sick off of bats.
Really? That's just allegedly. Insects are kind of the same way. Locusts, crickets, grasshoppers. I mean, some specific kinds
That they can eat.
and then swarming animals have a lot of room, which I would think was locusts, crickets, and grasshoppers. So these are the kind of things that you're going to see in here, which is very interesting. And after a while, there's a little bit of a pattern, like you said. They need to be clean to begin with, and yeah.
But here's the thing. And verses 24 and 25. By these you defile yourselves. Anyone who touches their carcass will be unclean until the evening. The thing that we have to remember is that this is about ceremonial uncleanness or cleanness. Yeah. A person, how they approach God at the tabernacle. This is not sin. This is not, like they've the way we think of sin, right? This is not, it's only until evening.
Right. So if somebody did have lobster,
yeah,
they would be considered unclean until evening.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But after 6 p.m., they could show back up at the tabernacle, right? They clean, they wash, whatever. Now, some people would say, well, that would be considered an intentional, willful sin. I'm going to violate God's law, which then turns it into a hard attitude thing, and now maybe you do
something
you
bigger
have
or
some
different.
Yeah. But if I'm eating lobster and they don't know what it is, I'm like, here, try this. I've made them unclean until evening. It wasn't because they're in full rebellion against God that they had bacon wrapped lobster tail. That time.
Have you ever had bacon?
Have
you ever had bacon wrapped lobster
bacon? It is, yes.
I don't think I ever had.
I'm not saying you should do it all the time. But it's not bad when it's
with
done
butter.
well. With lots of butter sauce on it. That's right. Yeah. So then the rest of the chapter is exactly what you would expect it to be. These are the things. But again,
so we don't get a really good reason why these animals and why some of these not animals. But God doesn't have to tell us everything.
Well, He doesn't. But the fact that this is for Israel only at this time. Okay. Right. Again, it's not a sin thing. Sin is sin, right? Yep. Whether it's Israel or Gentiles or whatever, sin is sin. This was the reason that a lot of these laws were in place was to make them separate and different from the nations around them. That was intentional, right? And I'll point that out in other places as well. Certain things that they were supposed to do or not do. Some people think about this from a general health.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense, right?
Standpoint.
I mean, just pigs, right, are inherently dirty, carry a lot of diseases,
right?
And you got to cook pork to whatever degrees you got to cook to now.
What's interesting though is that number has come down. That degree has come down because they're not just roaming the
if you give them decent feed.
Yeah, if the animals are taken care of, you don't have to cook it as hot because there's not parasites and stuff. Which I know older people and people who've been eating pork for a long time are like, I still won't eat it unless it's at a certain.
First time I saw pork that had a little red in it, I was like, ooh.
Yeah, I know. But if it's so even that tells us that there's a cultural and scientific and a thing to it. At this time, there's probably a really good chance. No, you do not want to be eating that.
Yeah, exactly. Because their pigs would have been eating all the leftovers.
Right. So you have shrimp and lobster and all that stuff. The trash,
guys on the
eaters
bottom
of the
feeders,
bottom feeders of the sea.
Yep.
Okay. Well, maybe that's true. But if you're doing them in tanks and stuff, is that? Again, this law isn't for us anyway. Right. But if you're thinking through, well, it's because of the health reasons. Well, even that then is going to change over time and location and everything in many cases.
Yeah, good point. All right, so we finish up with chapter 12.
Yeah, really short chapter.
Yeah, and it talks about that women are ritually unclean after giving birth. So again, not sin.
No.
Just ritually unclean, so there's a process that they need to go through.
Yep.
And of course, it depends.
Yeah.
Right? If you have a boy, here's how long you have to wait. If it's a girl, here's how long you have to wait.
Yep.
There's some interesting things there. I think with the girls are twice as long as a boy.
Yeah.
But also there's a rule with boys, right, that they have to be circumcised in 8 days.
And on the 8th day.
So if you're ritually unclean for 20 days, you're not going to be with your kid there.
Can't go to do
yeah,
that.
right.
Yeah.
So
this is also their naming day. This became their naming day. So they are named and circumcised. The boys named and circumcised on the 8th day. Again, medicinally, there's been a lot of studies that I've heard over time that say that the vitamin K, potassium, at, generally speaking, and of course with shots and all this other stuff, vaccinations, you've got this changes.
Right.
But generally speaking, I'm told the potassium is at its peak point 8 days after birth. And so for blood clotting and circumcision and everything, there
makes a lot of sense.
Lots of things that God knows that maybe they didn't know that we can know today. But today, circumcision for those who do circumcise their sons, a lot of times they're getting a vitamin K shot within the first couple of days, and you don't have to wait till the 8th day.
Yeah.
Again, circumcision is for Israel. It was a sign of the covenant with Abraham. There's you have to talk with your doctor. Is this something that you want to do today? It's not. There's not a religious reason. There's not a church reason for it. It's not a church issue. If you want to do it medically, then that's a medical issue, not a. I'm not Jewish.
Yep.
You don't have to do that as a.
Okay. I want to end with one more thing. So at the end of the unclean period for the woman who has given birth, then there has to be a sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And that sacrifice needs to be a year-old lamb or two turtle doves if they're poor.
Yeah.
Yep. So I think I brought up Mary and Joseph a little early, and you pointed to this, but this is the point where in the Christmas story, we always see where Mary and Joseph then went to the temple and
on the 8th day
got two turtle doves.
Yep.
Yeah.
For Jesus' circumcision and naming.
Right.
So what does that tell
this
us?
is why. That Jesus is Jewish.
It tells us number one, Jesus
and he's a boy.
Jewish, and he's a boy. And from a family perspective, they were poor.
Oh, yeah.
And that was your point.
It was like too easy.
That was pretty good. No. And that's why you brought it up, because
exactly.
it tells us, without telling us,
Yeah.
if you don't know Leviticus 12, you're reading Luke chapter 2 and 2 or 3, and they offered two turtle doves, and you're like, that's nice, and you move on.
Exactly.
You read it here, and you're like, they couldn't even afford a lamb.
Right. Which also means the wise men haven't been there yet.
That's right, because they don't have their gold and all this stuff yet.
And everything. Yeah.
So the wise men did not show up, at least until after Jesus was circumcised, named on the 8th day, and the purification ritual was done. Right. So
Or
the Magi did not arrive within the first 40 days, at the very least.
Right.
Yep. But fun stuff. We're finally starting to get into the stuff that you think about when you think about Leviticus, the law and all this, right? Actually, this does go into the next reading as well a little bit, and we'll come back and talk about that next time. Until then, if you have questions, if something crosses your mind, you're like, hey, I'd like to know about that a little more, just ask. You can make a comment here. You can contact us through our website, oaktreechurch.com, and we'd be happy to answer those questions for you. So until then, read this week's, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.